Hey there, Games Apprentice back with another Evercade video. This week I'm going to be looking at the Piko Collection 2. Is it as quality as the Piko Collection 1, or did they just run out of ideas? Let's find out. Now, if you followed my channel, you know that I absolutely loved the Piko Collection 1, and it's my highest scoring game on the Evercade so far. One of the things that I noticed though when I was playing it was that there's a serious lack of sports titles. And this is where the Piko Collection 2 comes in and solves that problem. Now, I absolutely love sport games and I'm familiar with a few of these titles, so I'm really excited to play this one, especially off the back of the Piko Collection 1. So here the games are ranked from worst to best. World Trophy Soccer is not a game I'd heard of before. However, when the game loaded up and I saw the Chrysalis logo, my nostalgia furnace was instantly lit. Chrysalis made the Manchester United Europe and Leeds United games, which I had on the Acorn Archimedes. Unfortunately, I'd gone back and played these a few years ago, so I had a fair idea of what I was in for. This is basically just an unlicensed version of those games. The problem is that those games were never very good. They had a decent career mode for the time, but the gameplay is not good. Honestly, I've no idea how myself or anyone had patience to play these games. They're just frustrating and simply not fun. You're constantly battling against the controls, just to try and get some vague hope of them doing what you're trying to do. It's got the same problems a lot of old football games have. You try to pass or shoot accurately with a D-pad, which just doesn't offer you enough control, and even if it did, the game would probably just ignore that control anyway. There's also simply not enough buttons to vary what you can do. One cool thing to say about it is that you can make subs at the touch of a button. It seems crazy as they definitely could have done something better with that button, but I don't remember this being a football game again until the Wii U version of FIFA. Now of course it's a common thing. If you're familiar with these games, you might briefly, and I mean briefly, enjoy that nostalgia hit. For everyone else, this is the hardest pass you can get. The worst football game they ever Evercade right here, or soccer for Americans watching. I feel like I played this one when I was younger, although a lot of the Winter Olympic style games roll into one. I thought I'd enjoy this one as these games are usually pretty fun thanks to all the variation. The problem with this one though is that everything is just so unbelievably slow. And the graphics and the frame rate really don't help that. There's 8 different events to it, but none of them are good. You've got a choice of dull or mind-numbingly dull. The worst by far is the cross-country skiing. It's incredibly slow and more like an endurance challenge than anything else, going on for close to 5 minutes. This feels like an eternity in this game. The graphics and frame rate make some of the courses, such as skiing through flags, really difficult. It's hard to tell how much you need to turn to get to them as they flicker into view. The only positive on this one is that it's all straightforward controls wise, unlike the next game on this list. One of the things that I liked about the underwhelming Commodore 64 collection was the instruction booklet was really thorough when it came to the Olympic-based games, telling you the controls and giving you some tips. Summer Challenge, however, does you no such favours. If anything, it puts you off further with the small amount of control scheme it does offer you, labelling what turns out to be jump a hurdle with quit replay. Unlike the Winter Challenge, figuring out most of these controls on your own is really tough to impossible. Sure, you can dig around online and find them, but if you own a console that basically sells people physical copies of ROMs, you probably don't want to encourage those people to look around online. If you can be bothered to track down these controls, then this game would probably be a little higher on the list. It's a lot better than Winter Challenge, although it possesses the same graphical style. It does work a lot better for these events and without all the snow everywhere. The events themselves are also a lot shorter and more fun. It's just whether you're willing to put that extra effort in. Not soccer this time, but American football. Beyond football, soccer, I'm not a huge sport fan, but but I do really like sport games, and old school American football games like John Madden's American Football and Tecmo Bowl are some of my favourites. This does look a little bit like the old Madden games, so I thought maybe it'd be alright. And for the most part it is. But then one glaringly terrible choice that they made with this one comes to light. If you've never had any interest in the games, one of the most crucial parts of any American football game is the quarterback pass. You've got to hold your nerve to hang onto the ball as long as possible, frantically looking around at your runners trying to spot the perfect opening before you launch the ball in their direction. Usually while this is going on, you've got to keep one eye on the defensive line that's quickly breaking your wall and getting ready to take you down. As a defending team, you've generally got controls over one of the players trying to take down the quarterback. A fun battle of nerves and skill for everyone involved. By design, Power Football completely chooses to eliminate this concept from the game, because for some reason they made the decision that when you pass the ball, the entire game pauses and you can spend all the time in the world looking at who to pass to. This means that you don't need to keep one eye on the defence coming at you, you can keep both eyes on them, watching until they get within a millimetre, and then hit the pass button and you'll be absolutely fine. Sure, there's still the challenge of then catching the pass, but it really does ruin the whole game. I never played Soccer Kid, but I remember seeing it in magazines a lot as a kid, and it looked great. So naturally, I was excited to finally give it a go. First of all, this version doesn't look anywhere near as nice as the Amiga 500 version that I was familiar with seeing. Still, it looks alright, especially the little football skill animations. The game apparently starts out in East London according to the opening screen, but then Westminster is clearly only a few hundred yards in the background. Although there's also floating ledges full of candy, so they probably weren't going for a documentary on the East End of London. The main issue with the game is the whole concept really. It's a platformer where you have a football as a weapon. The problem with that is exactly what you'd expect. A football is a terrible weapon. They don't come back like a boomerang, and they're not easy to aim. If anything, a gun or knife would have made far more sense for a game about a kid in the East End of London. And it would have been so much easier to murder these kids on skateboards, innocent animals, and these hard-working builders that Soccer Kid seems intent on terrorising. When you kick a ball at an enemy, it doesn't kill it, you need at least 2 hits for most things. As I mentioned, your ball doesn't come back unless you get very lucky with a bounce, so you then got to generate another one which takes a few seconds. Constantly doing this slows the game down, and it's infuriating when you then got to kick the ball like my mate Dave, who yells "Have it!" and proceeds to launch it into the sky, never to be seen again. This game probably isn't that bad, and I might be willing to concede that I'm being a bit harsh on it. Maybe it could be higher up the list. Its main problem is that the Mega Drive Road Rash games are some of my favourite racing games, and this sure looks and feels a lot like it. You're on a bike and you can kick people. That's Road Rash. Unfortunately, it's just a poor man's Road Rash. It feels like they tried to copy it and just got it all wrong. The kick is nowhere near as satisfying, nor is it easy to take people out with it. However, the computer players are really aggressive with it, and this game is hard enough without being attacked. Like Road Rash, if you hit stuff you fall off your bike, and if you fall off too many times, your bike is wrecked. The races are long, and there's so many palm trees and street lamps by the side of the road that it's hard enough to avoid them as it is without being kicked into them. The music's decent. Again, it's no Road Rash, but there's nothing offensive about it. Perhaps there is a decent racer here, but playing this game just reminds me how I can't play Road Rash on the Evercade, so please just put Road Rash on the Evercade. I feel like I'm not asking for the world. This one isn't too bad a racing game. It plays a bit like a cross between World Rally Championship and Micro Machines. The camera's really zoomed in, so you don't get much time to see the corners, so you need to react fast or know the track. Thankfully, most of the time, the corners aren't too tight, so it's not too difficult to react. The cars have a bit of skid to them, but the physics for them isn't great, and it barely feels like you're racing a car, especially as you pretty much always travel at the same speed. Personally, I found this game a bit too easy and not challenging enough. but at the same time, because of the lack of time you get to see corners coming up, if it was harder, it would just be too frustrating. It's always nice to see a PS1 game on these collections, especially one that's already packed with other games. Football Madness is exactly that, and unlike previous football games that was American football, this is good old everywhere else football. This one is a bit different to the other ones as it's five-a-side soccer where pretty much anything goes, similar to something like Sega Soccer Slam or Mario Strikers. The main issues with this one are that it's really slow and clunky for this type of game, and also that your teammates generally just run around like headless chickens. Luckily, your keeper's good, and as good as the keepers that are in Mario Strikers, constantly keeping you in the game as defending is really difficult. Like with most 3D games, moving in the exact direction you want and having to be really precise about it is infuriatingly hard with a D-pad. Multiplayer you might have a good time, but single player on this one is just painfully dull due to how good the computer is. This one is a lot like Speedball 2, but from a horizontal perspective. And when I say a lot like Speedball 2, I mean a lot like Speedball 2. The difference is that they've gone for a medieval setting instead of a futuristic one, and that there's weapons scattered around the pitch. Also, the point system's a bit more standard. The only way to score points is by throwing the ball into the net. It's a decent looking game with a fun art style and character designs, and it does really play similar to Speedball 2, with the added bonus that you can actually see the ball in the air because of the camera perspective. Goals tend to all be a bit samey though. It's usually a case of your keeper getting taken out and someone just throwing the ball into an empty net. It also doesn't help that your keeper looks a lot like every other player, so it's hard to realise that that's your last man. If you like Speedball 2, you'll probably like this one, but a little bit less. I'm going to bunch these two games together to save everyone time as they're so similar, and I had them at number 3 and 4 slots anyway. These games are basically arcade basketball games that feel like a worse version of NBA Jam. NBA Jam is a quality arcade game though, so that's not surprising. I guess putting them both on here tells you that they're not planning another Piko Sport Collection in the future, and they want to pad out the numbers because they're so similar. The second game is clearly better than the first, looks a little better and it's got a bit more style to it, and also the gameplay it's a bit easier to tackle than the first. They're not bad games, but they do get a bit repetitive. 2-on-2 basketball needs to be pretty special to keep you entertained for that long, as it's just constantly back and forth. Anyone who followed my Twitch channel, which is probably no one, will know that I really enjoyed this game when it first came across it last year on the Nintendo Switch Online library. It's a fun NES game that I'd never heard of until that point. It's pretty unique with how it plays. It's a boat racing game where each race plays from 3 different perspectives. They're all very different. The first is like a drag race from side on, which is purely about timing the accelerate. Second is from behind, where you just move left to right, staying within the flags and avoiding obstacles in the water. And the third is top down and looks a bit like an 8-bit Micro Machines. The courses are filled with twists and turns and obstacles, and it feels like a competitive racing game. Eliminator Boat Duel holds up really well, and if you do get this collection, it's definitely one to play. The original Top Racer was on the Piko 1 collection. It had an odd split screen mechanic that was used no matter if it was multiplayer or single player, and I didn't really think too much of it. Top Racer 2 ditches that in favour of a more traditional arcade experience, and it's for the better. Freed from the shackles of having to display 2 screens at once, Top Racer 2 is free to be a much faster game with a much less cluttered screen. You can fire off turbos for extra speed, and it's even got a cool little car flipping animation. Graphically, the surrounding areas are fairly basic and it doesn't look too impressive, but the gameplay, sound effects and music definitely make up for that. It's not the greatest arcade racer ever, but it's definitely one of the best on the Evercade so far. I'm so frustrated with this collection. I was really looking forward to it and I was so disappointed because Honestly, the sport games on it just haven't held up well whatsoever. In general, retro sport games tend not to hold up that well. The lack of buttons on old controllers means that the gameplay is quite limited, and it takes something really special, like Tecmo Super Bowl for example, to really stand the test of time. Also, the lack of graphics and frame rates can really slow some games down a bit too much to make them just not representing the sport that they represent. Even the best games on this collection are probably just mediocre games on other carts. I feel like I've got quite excited about them while playing them just because of the absolute garbage that's on this collection. In general, sport games tend not to be good single player games, so that's where multiplayer comes in. That's what they're designed for. They're designed to be quite competitive. And these games are probably a little bit more fun multiplayer, but any friend that you ask to play these games with you are just going to question your sanity and probably question your friendship as well. This collection is purely just quantity over quality. It's basically, Piko had a bunch of leftover sport games from the previous collection and they were like, what do we do with these? Whack them on a cart, and that's exactly what they've done. For all those reasons, I'm going to score this game fairly mediocre, 5 out of 10. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want to see more Evercade videos and my other upcoming content, do click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I'll catch you next time.